Broadcasting from the Camino Hermitage here on Camino Island regarding the unpublished writings of Paramhansa Yogananda. And as I have departed from time to time from that strict definition of the source of the inspiration I share, so also today I'm going to share a recorded excerpt, an excerpt from the recorded voice of Paramhansa Yogananda. You know, fall comes a little bit earlier than the actual equinox here at the 48th parallel in the northern hemisphere. And so just this last weekend, I've noticed some trees gaining their reddish, brownish, yellowish colors. And that's pretty typical. By the end of August, we begin to see the signs of early fall. And fall is really an excellent season, not the only season, but an excellent season for those of us who at least annually, go on retreat or take a personal private seclusion. And so the excerpt that I'm going to share with you comes from a talk in which the word Sabbath is part of the title. And it has to do with a very famous saying of Jesus Christ when he was criticized for allowing his disciples, I think, to pick ears of corn or for him to heal on the day of the Sabbath in his time in Israel. And his retort to that is that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And who am I to argue with that? I think it's a both and, because in this excerpt you will hear that Yogananda is saying that the real meaning of the Sabbath, and it doesn't do any good to call it a command, but the real meaning is the invitation, the guideline, that those who are truth seekers, spiritual seekers, devotees, should put aside each week some time in prayer and meditation, or in some way focusing on God as opposed to our other duties and entertainment and other pastimes. That's really the purpose of the Sabbath, and God rested on the seventh day. Whatever the seventh day is, I don't know, whether it's Saturday or Sunday. And the Christians, the early Christians, pretty quickly switched the so-called Sabbath to Sunday. I've never really received a complete explanation for why. One is of course, the resurrection taking place on a Sunday, we are told. That would be a good reason, I suppose. In any case, maybe it was partly also to break with the strict rules of the Jewish Sabbath, and they were breaking away, of course, from the strict adherence to the rules of Judaism and its theology. So maybe that's it. But in any case, you'll hear here in just a moment that Yogananda is encouraging all devotees to put aside a little bit of time weekly. So let me get this, make sure, I'm not sure this is really the right one. There we go. Ready? Okay.
The Sabbath day is meant principally to put your mind on God. You don't do that. It's extremely necessary. We are reviving the custom. And one day, at least a few hours, you should wholly think of nothing but God, or practice your meditations, by which you feel that divine bliss, and your whole week will be charged with the divine consciousness. And because you don't observe that Sabbath, you do not give one day even to your whole mind to God, your week is full of worries. And your months are full of worry, and years of life spent in worry, and the harvest of sin means error, mistaken existence is death, means a sorrowful change, a sorrowful transition from this life to the other. There is no death possible to the soul. But why go out of this body in disaster, in sorrow? But if you observe the real Sabbath of thinking of God, and doing all activities for God, or doing all activities with the thought of God, that is the real Sabbath. Suppose you pull up your bullock from the ditch with the thought of God on the Sabbath day. It's all right. It is observance of Sabbath. If you keep on doing material things and think of God all the time, still it's Sabbath. But if you do material things without the thought of God and thinking that you are observing Sabbath, it is not Sabbath. But if you meditate upon God as much as you can on the Sabbath day, that's the real Sabbath. But that does not mean that while you are thinking of God and somebody is dying in front of you and you say, it's too bad, it's Sabbath day, you've got to die. Well, God will say, what's the matter with you? I am dying in that body and you don't help me.
So essentially, Yogananda ji is articulating really the same thing that Jesus said. Some of the aspects that Yogananda ji affirms or encourages is that, yes, meditating once a week for more than just a few minutes, more than what you do maybe on a daily basis, assuming you do meditate. And for another, making the effort on that day, really every day, of course, but certainly on that day in order to develop the habit that even if you do other things or help people, to have your mind connected to God, on God, as he puts it. And so Yogananda affirms both the value of a typical Sunday here in the West, or in the Christian tradition, it's Sunday. Maybe other traditions too. I know there's Friday, for the Muslims, Saturday for the Jews, and Sunday for the Christians. I don't know about those pagan Hindus. Just kidding. So it's valuable to do that, to set aside time, to stop what you're doing. There's no end of duties that we can concoct. They will never end until we leave this body. And so he's affirming that value. He's affirming the habit of really putting your mind on God on that day. Of course, we should be doing it every day, but let's face it, that's not so easy. And if we therefore indicate a particular day, that will help us. As he said, it will infuse the entire amount of the rest of your week with that consciousness and that vibration. And I want to extend this a little further because I'm talking of or contemplating the advent of the fall season, when energy begins to turn within from the busyness and outwardness of the powerful summer sun. And I want to talk just a moment about seclusion. Yogananda, though he's not speaking of seclusion here in this excerpt, he is well known among us at Ananda for saying seclusion is the price of greatness. Now, he's not saying that by an annual week of seclusion or whatever time you give to it, that you will become another Einstein or the leader of your country or something. He's speaking of the greatness of the soul. And our teacher and founder of Ananda, direct disciple of Yogananda, Swami Kriyananda, established for those of us whom he trained the encouragement and habit of taking up to 1 or even 2 weeks of personal private seclusion, during which we don't speak to anybody, we don't conduct any of our normal work habits or so on. Really, even other things might be permissible, like doing a little bit of art or journaling or what have you to some extent. But I know there are some people whose, quote, seclusion, unquote, consists mostly of doing artistic and creative things. And that's not really what he meant. Nothing wrong with it, I guess, but I don't call that seclusion. But even Swami Kriyananda would sometimes take seclusion and be busy writing a book. But for him, in addition to that, and maybe for some of these others, being secluded at least meant he wasn't having human contact, talking especially, or dealing with correspondence on a daily basis. So I suppose it's a a semi-seclusion, what I call a ha-ha seclusion. But the seclusion Yogananda really meant, and the kind that I and Padma and many, many others who are part of Ananda do, is a time of primarily prayer and meditation. We do some spiritual reading, and you have to cook some food. I've tried dieting and fasting in my younger years during seclusion, but it distracts from the depth of the seclusion, because when you start to fast, the body starts acting out, stuff like that, toxins. So I know for Padma and I, and I'm guessing for a lot of our friends, you lower the bar for eating. You just eat simply and just in order to keep the body at bay and not have it impinge on your consciousness. And that's probably a lot more practical. In any case, and you can do it for one day, you can do it on a weekend. I don't suggest you start with a whole week unless you are really meditating a couple hours a day and have done so for a longer term. But in any case, whatever period of time works for you, it should be ideally truly focused on prayer and meditation. Healing prayers for others, reflections about your life and journaling are perfectly fine, although you want to be still and know before you do these other things. And so, to me, seclusion is part of the concept of the Sabbath, although the Sabbath is a weekly thing, at least by tradition and the usage of the term, and seclusion is, for most of us, an annual thing. And there's an in-between stage I want to encourage for everybody. Not everyone's ready for private, personal seclusion, but going on retreat with other people, during which there's probably some silent periods, during which there's certainly spiritual practices like meditation and yoga, maybe classes or satsangs to attune oneself to spiritual vibrations and truths, and so on. So under the pandemic, the Expanding Light Retreat in California has been closed to the public, but I know the meditation retreat 6 miles up the road is on a limited basis open, and that would be more for seclusion rather than a group retreat. So I think a lot of us are looking forward to the passing of the pandemic in such a way that we can gather together as friends and go on retreat and support one another. But in the meantime, I'll end with where we began, which is the importance of making one day a week specially dedicated to attuning yourself to God within and without. During the pandemic, with far fewer people showing up for Sunday service, making the effort to get up and dressed and driving to service and being with fellow devotees, although the attendance has been decent in person, but not like pre-pandemic. And so I think some of us are concerned or wonder whether or not when the pandemic ends, whether you will come back to Sunday. And so I'm making also a pitch here, whether you come at this point during the pandemic or simply watch online, I'm putting in a plug for really setting aside the Sunday morning at least. We have a meditation at 9 a.m. and the service at 10. Other Ananda centers follow a basically similar pattern. There's lots to choose from. But I think the idea and the experience of Sunday has perhaps taken a bit of a hit during the pandemic. And I chose this audio excerpt of Yogananda specifically for that purpose. Okay, great souls, I see some blue sky. I think the sun's coming out, and time for me to mow what I call a lawn. It's mostly brown except for the daisies or whatever you call those weeds with the yellow heads on them. So nice to be with you, and